Tonight, a heartbreaking plea from a daughter to her missing mother.
Mum, we love you so much and we miss you and we need you at home with us.
Also tonight, details emerge on the mass eviction of residents in Williamstown North. The long wait over for care leavers as the state government says sorry. And 2 + 2, the twins who gave birth 22 minutes apart. Good evening, Tamara Oudyn with ABC News. The family of missing Ballarat East woman Samantha Murphy has made a heart-wrenching plea in the hope of finding the 51-year-old mother alive. After 5 days of searching, police are yet to uncover any strong leads into her disappearance, but say there are no suspicious circumstances at this stage. Laura Mayers reports from Ballarat.
Distraught and in tears, Jess Murphy is living a nightmare.
Mum's a really strong woman and she's far too determined to give up this fight. I know she's out there somewhere, so if you could please continue to search for her, to give us something to work with, we'd really appreciate it.
Summoning all the courage she could muster, the eldest daughter of Ballarat East woman Samantha Murphy issued a plea for her return after going missing 5 days ago, speaking directly to her mother.
Mum, we love you so much and we miss you and we need you at home with us.
Samantha's husband Mick was by his daughter's side, struggling to comprehend what's happened to his wife.
People just don't vanish into thin air. Someone's got to know something. You know, whether it be any little thing that you might think's relevant, just call the police.
Police say the mother of 3 left her home just after 7 a.m. on Sunday for a run in the Wulwukarung Regional Park. Their search for Samantha has now expanded to the suburbs on the outskirts of the park and are looking for CCTV from Sunday morning.
Certainly if they find anything of interest on the footage, we'd like them to let police know that.
A routine runner in the area, the 51-year-old's disappearance is out of character, but police say no suspicious circumstances have been identified at this stage.
And we're keeping an open mind and considering all possibilities, and we're being extremely thorough and methodical with that investigation.
But potential leads have so far met dead ends. CCTV thought to be of Samantha running past a property has been discounted, as have items found in nearby bushland. Police say they're working through an enormous amount of information received from the public. There are still dozens of community members out helping in the search, vowing they won't stop until she's found.
We just need everyone to keep looking. It may be day 5, but Sam is the most strongest person, both mentally and physically.
Just keep going, keep encouraging each other. I know that it's really hard to lose hope at the minute, but I do believe that we will find her.
Hope her family is clinging on to.
Please come home soon. I can't wait to see you and to give you the biggest hug when I do.
Laura Mayers, ABC News, Ballarat.
The ABC has uncovered details of a council-led campaign for a mass eviction of residents from their homes in Melbourne's west. Last May, the Hobsons Bay Council ordered residents in the industrial zoned estate to leave immediately, but internal documents show the evictions had been more than 6 months in the making. The local government minister has referred the matter to the Ombudsman.
On one side of this road, enormous fuel storage tanks. On the other, a former migrant hostel offering dozens of residents affordable long-term housing at a time of need.
I can't afford to buy an expensive place, so I managed to do it and to move here.
Some own, others rent. All were distraught when the council ordered them to urgently leave last May, saying it had become aware they were living unlawfully in the industrial zoned area and the risk from the mobile tanks was too great.
We tried to hide it from the kids for as long as we could, but obviously we can't anymore. It's always on their mind. Are we going to lose our home?
Now, Freedom of Information documents have revealed a campaign put in motion from November 2022, labelled Operation Pegasus. It shows the council knew some of the 88 properties had been inhabited for more than 15 years, raising the question of whether residents were entitled to existing use rights. It flags a change in approach.
The council could have invited us all to make applications to affirm our existing use rights. That would have solved their zoning problem.
Other documents suggest Mobil asked the council to enforce its planning obligations in 2018. Residents say that contradicts earlier suggestions. The council only recently learned people were living there.
They're saying to the public, it's urgent. How urgent can it be?
The council said its eviction notices only went out after it completed an investigation into suspected residential use at the estate. Residents have since been granted 2 6-month grace periods. They've been ordered to leave by May. Mobil says it contacted the council in 2018 to check its safety obligations were being met. Those who remain are desperately hoping for leeway.
They will not consider any solution that involves us staying here.
Seems a terrible outcome that we would then have a precinct of vacant housing in a housing crisis.
The residents are urging the council to apply for a zoning change. Jessie Thompson, ABC News.
Academic experts will be called in to help craft VCE exams to try to avoid a repeat of the embarrassing mistakes in last year's tests. The ABC can reveal a review into the bungles has uncovered a cultural problem at Victoria's Curriculum and Assessment Authority. As a result, the Education Minister has refused to give its board a pay rise this year. Bridget Rollerson has this exclusive Stateline story.
Last year's VCE exams were plagued with problems. Mistakes in maths and chemistry tests caused distress for students, while some were even given the wrong Chinese paper. It led to a review into the Assessment Authority, which the ABC can reveal will recommend academic experts be brought in to help with future exams.
We need to, I think, bring more people into the tent, so to speak, that are experts in the field to really help us with the writing of the exam, and then go through a more rigorous process to ensure that the exam questions are 100% watertight correct.
But it's not the first time mistakes have been found. Another review was held last year after bungles in 2022.
Some of them have been less serious, sometimes it's typos or whatever, but some of the mistakes have been serious mathematical errors.
Mathematicians and teachers who've been campaigning for experts to be involved say the move's overdue.
There's just been experience in the VCE, particularly in maths at least, that the experts haven't been there and the exams suffer as a consequence.
I think it's a really great day for education in Victoria. I think something like that is long overdue.
The Assessment Authority apologised to students, saying it acknowledges that errors didn't meet community standards, and it's working to ensure this year's exam processes are stronger. But the Education Minister, Ben Carroll, has chosen not to give the board a pay rise this year.
A message has been sent, I think, from me as Minister. It is unacceptable what these Year 12s went through. We've got to do better.
It's not right. Students were affected in an adverse way and a broken system needs to be fixed.
The government says it'll make the report into the mistakes public when it receives it next month.
Former wards of the state have finally had their trauma caused by abuse recognised by the Victorian government with a formal apology. In an historic sitting of Parliament, the Premier apologised for past practices that were cruel and caused mental anguish for decades.
It was an emotional moment. A long time coming.
We failed you. For this, we are deeply sorry.
90,000 children were put into state care between 1928 and 1990, some forcibly removed from their parents. Many suffered degrading treatment and horrific abuse from those charged with their care.
There are countless ways to harm a child, and all of them leave a mark. We apologise that instead of reading, writing and arithmetic, many instead learnt of floggings, beltings and brutality.
It's been 68 years coming, and it's a bit of a relief, a bit of a off my shoulders.
Terry Hellman and John Lawrence met each other at this Surrey Hills orphanage in the 1960s. Like thousands of others, they suffered cruelty, neglect and abuse, leading to ongoing trauma and a sense of shame.
The shame does not belong to you. It is ours. It was always ours, and it always will be ours. Today is about reclaiming that shame.
It means a lot. I mean, there's a lot of survivors out there that aren't here today that couldn't come in and face the day. They couldn't face this event because they're too hurt. And I just sort of think that it's a healing process.
To me, they seemed genuine, and I just hope their words turn to actions with redress.
That redress scheme is coming soon. Richard Willingham, ABC News, Melbourne.
Disability advocates have protested outside Victoria's Parliament House, calling for changes to the state's guardianship laws. They took aim at how the state's so-called gag laws prevent people under guardianship from speaking out about their experience. Guardianship orders allow a person or organisation to make decisions on behalf of someone who's been assessed as not having the capacity to do so themselves. The Disability Royal Commission also recommended changes to guardianship laws across the country.
It's no longer appropriate in this day and age. It's paternalistic, it's disempowering, and we think it's not consistent with human rights principles.
New rights and protections are on the way for hundreds of thousands of workers through the biggest update to Australia's industrial laws in a decade. The Senate's passed a sweeping package of changes that'll safeguard conditions for casuals, truckies and low-paid rideshare drivers. But customers who order a lift or a meal are being warned they'll have to foot some of the bill through higher prices.
Most days, Utsav Batari spends 10 hours behind the wheel as a delivery driver. He's a gig worker, working long hours and often for not much pay.
There has been instances where I've worked 100 hours and barely made $1,000.
The amount of work he gets fluctuates, and how much he earns depends on which app he is working for.
We do not know how many hours we're going to work next week and how much we're going to make.
We've got workers in the gig economy that are literally rushing to their deaths.
Now, new laws are aiming to bring minimum standards to the gig economy.
Gig workers in Australia will now know that Australia is truly a country where you don't have to rely on tips to make ends meet.
The new laws apply to gig workers, like drivers with Uber and Menulog. For the first time, the Fair Work Commission will be able to set minimum standards, like a base rate of pay. That might mean delivery drivers get the same pay per minute, no matter which app they work for.
The Australian industrial relations system has modernised for a modern type of work.
Some of the major gig economy players backed the new laws, but acknowledge they'll lead to higher prices.
The exact price rises that come from the changes that will be announced today will ultimately be determined by the numbers that are set by the Fair Work Commission.
The laws passed the Senate this afternoon, wrapped in a bill with changes for casuals, truckies and a new right to disconnect, and backed by enough of the crossbench, but strongly opposed by the coalition.
If you thought as a business in Australia you were drowning under a deluge of red tape, the bad news is it is about to get worse.
Getting this tranche of legislation through the Senate is certainly a political win for the government. It's second in only a few days after the coalition folded and backed the Prime Minister's revised income tax cuts. Industrial relations can make for difficult politics, but Labor appears to have figured out how to negotiate with an often fractious Senate crossbench. There are new battles looming, however, in housing, education and a budget only a few months away. Tom Lowry, ABC News, Canberra.
Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister has urged Australia not to give up on his country during an address to federal parliament. James Marape is the first Pacific leader to speak to a joint sitting of both houses. But the visit comes against a backdrop of rising regional tensions and looming political chaos in PNG. Here's Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts.
New honours for an old friend.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea.
James Marape made history when he faced a packed lower house.
I welcome you to the House.
But he kept one eye on past legacies.
This is truly a historic moment for my country.
Almost 50 years ago, Australia shepherded PNG into independence. Now both countries are fashioning a framework for a new relationship.
Neighbours and mates, partners and equals.
But the backdrop is troubled. Just last month, Port Moresby was rocked by looting, and Australia is still plugging PNG's budget shortfalls.
I ask you, do not give up on Papua New Guinea. We have always bounced back from our low moments.
Last year, Australia and PNG signed a landmark security pact, but China is still pressing to strike its own policing agreement with Mr Marape's government, closely watched by Canberra.
These autocrats who use the carrot one day and the stick the next
have a complete disregard for sovereignty.
January's unrest has also sapped Mr Marape's political strength, and he could face a no-confidence motion next week. The Prime Minister's confident he'll survive, but his opponents are unrelenting.
Politics in PNG, we say one day is a long time in politics.
The symbolism of today's address is clear. It's an offer that has previously been reserved for major powers like the United States and China, or to traditional friends like the United Kingdom and Canada. The Australian government is trying to say that it views Pacific nations as top-tier strategic partners in an increasingly perilous world. Facing an uncertain future,
our two countries are stuck with each other. We have no choice but to get along.
And facing it together. Stephen Jurgitz, ABC News, Canberra.
Coming up on 7:30, Sarah Ferguson speaks with Foreign Minister Penny Wong about the ongoing crisis in the Middle East.
Does the US and its allies, obviously including Australia, have any influence at all in how the Netanyahu government is conducting this war?
Well, what I can do is to use Australia's respected voice to advocate for peace.
Construction union boss John Setka has announced he'll retire as head of the Victorian CFMEU later this year. Mr Setka is one of the most prominent, influential and at times controversial union officials in the country. He's held the role for more than a decade after being elected as State Secretary in 2012. The CFMEU says Mr Setka will not seek re-election when a ballot is held later in the year. An inner Melbourne council is pushing ahead with plans to resurrect a vandalised Captain Cook statue, rejecting calls for a discussion about its future. The statue on the St Kilda foreshore was cut off at the ankles in the lead up to Australia Day, leaving only his boots on display. In an at times fiery meeting last night, Port Phillip Council rejected a proposal to consult the community about what should happen to the statue. The council is working with Heritage Victoria to reinstate it. Prince William has spoken for the first time since his father was diagnosed with cancer, thanking the public for their support and well wishes. The heir to the throne returned to royal duties after time away to look after his wife and is preparing to take on an increased workload while the King has treatment. The monarch has also issued his first statement since announcing his illness as he recuperates in private.
Prince William is back at work after 3 weeks away from the spotlight, facing the public for the first time since news of the King's cancer battle.
We really appreciate everyone's kind messages. Thank you.
This charity gala for London's air ambulance was personal. The Prince used to be one of their pilots. He was all smiles as he rubbed shoulders with guests, including Hollywood star Tom Cruise. The heir to the throne acknowledged his family's difficult month. His wife is still recovering from abdominal surgery in January.
I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you also for the kind messages of support for Catherine and for my father, especially in recent days. It means a great deal to us all. It's fair to say the past few weeks have had a rather medical focus, so I thought I'd come to an air ambulance function to get away from it all.
Earlier in the day, the Prince handed out state honours at an investiture ceremony at Windsor Castle. With Catherine not expected back at work before Easter, the Prince and the Queen Consort will take on many of the King's public duties.
The months ahead will put pressure on the royal households as they try to fulfil all of their duties and maintain a strong public presence.
The King has made his first public statement since his cancer announcement, marking the 50th anniversary of independence in Grenada, one of the Commonwealth realms. I can only say how sorry I am that I cannot be with you in person to mark this momentous milestone. The monarch will now hold his weekly audience with the British Prime Minister over the phone.
I know the thoughts of the House and the country are with the King and his family. We wish His Majesty a speedy recovery and look forward to him resuming his public-facing duties in due course.
Meanwhile, Prince Harry is heading home to the US after spending a little more than 24 hours in England. He had a brief meeting with the King yesterday, but there was no royal reunion with his brother. Away from the public and press, the King is now recuperating from treatment at his Sandringham estate. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, London.
A ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas has been rejected by a defiant Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli Prime Minister forcefully dismissed Hamas's terms, vowing to fight until a complete victory has been achieved.
Hopes for an imminent humanitarian pause dashed.
I would like to emphasise again that there is no solution other than total victory.
An unwavering Benjamin Netanyahu calling Hamas's proposal for a truce delusional and restating only absolute defeat would ensure Israel's security.
We are on the path of total victory. Victory is within reach.
Hamas's proposal was in response to a ceasefire offer devised by mediators from Qatar, Egypt and the United States. But Israel said no to the terms.
Haven't seen in a long time.
Yeah, a few weeks.
Welcome.
Despite the rejection, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken remains hopeful.
While there are some clear non-starters in Hamas's response, we do think it creates space for agreement to be reached.
As talks stalled, bombing intensified, with Israel making a push into the southern tip of Gaza.
I'm especially alarmed by reports that the Israeli military intends to focus next on Rafah, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been squeezed in a desperate search for safety.
The US was bracing for this truce setback, predicting that Israel may publicly denounce the mediation as part of its negotiating tactics. But the Americans were hoping to pull off a diplomatic success, because without a ceasefire in Gaza, risks remain that a wider conflict in this region will continue to escalate.
As in Iraq, where anger is growing. The United States launched a drone strike in Baghdad, killing a senior commander of an Iran-backed militia group. This, the Pentagon says, was in response to the deaths of 3 American soldiers in neighbouring Jordan. While the campaign of strikes seeks to deter, the threat of retaliation attacks is very real. John Lyons, ABC News, Jerusalem.
At least 30 people have been killed in bombings near electoral offices on the eve of Pakistan's general election. The Islamic State group claimed responsibility for the bombings in Baluchistan province. Dozens of people were wounded, with some flown to Quetta for emergency treatment. Violence ahead of elections and on the actual day is common in Pakistan, which has struggled to rein in militancy. Tens of thousands of police and paramilitary forces have been deployed across the country following a recent surge of attacks. To finance now, and the local share market rose again today while the Aussie dollar held steady. Here's Alan Kohler.
The share market has now gone up 11 of the past 14 trading sessions, so while the first 2 weeks of the year were rubbish for share traders, the next few weeks have been great. Today's standout was AGL Energy after announcing that profit had quadrupled to $400 million. Slightly awkward after Alan Fels accused the electricity industry of price gouging yesterday. Not us, said the company, and we spent $35 million helping vulnerable customers. Speaking of price gouging, the ABS has produced some cost of living indexes which showed that the hardest hit are those with a job. The cost of living for employees went up 6.9% last year, more than the inflation rate of 4.1% and much more than those who aren't working. And this chart shows where most of the problem is: housing. The average cost of housing for employees per week has increased 14.5% in 2 years. Meanwhile, China's statisticians announced today that consumer prices there fell by 0.8% in January, continuing 4 straight months of deflation. So their cost of living's fine, except, of course, too much deflation and you're in serious trouble. The Chinese share market went up on the news following gains in New York and Tokyo. Oh, and one more thing about the matter of prices. Look at the cost blowout of the Reserve Bank's renovation of its headquarters in Martin Place, Sydney. From the initial estimate of $260 million to $500 and now $850 million. That's obviously why interest rates have gone up so much. That's got to stop. Iron ore and oil went up while copper and silver fell, and the Australian dollar is steady at just above 65 US cents.
A dominant display from all-rounder Marizanne Kapp has helped South Africa defeat Australia in a women's one-day international for the first time. Kapp made 75 as the tourists set the home team a rain-revised target of 234 at North Sydney Oval. Kapp then tore through the Australian top order and finished with 3 for 12. Australia was dismissed for 149 and South Africa won by 84 runs. The Proteas trail 6 points to 4 in the multi-format series.
It was nice to observe from a fast bowler point of view, but I suppose from a team point of view, not so nice. I think, we all know what Cappy can do with the ball, and she used the conditions beautifully tonight and bowled really well.
Australian captain Mitch Marsh is expected to take part in tomorrow night's T20 clash against the West Indies in Hobart, despite testing positive to COVID-19. Marsh participated in training at Bellerive this morning ahead of the first of the 3 T20 clashes, with the reigning Allan Border medalist still likely to take the field tomorrow night, albeit at a safe distance from his teammates. Tomorrow night's match is Australia's first T20 international on home soil since 2022. Wicketkeeper Matthew Wade says it's the perfect tune-up opportunity ahead of an away series in New Zealand and the World Cup later this year.
Yeah, continue to create bonds and try and win games leading into the World Cup. But we'll find out a lot about a few guys pushing, to make the 15. It's an exciting time.
Victoria has moved to the top of the One Day Cup table, beating South Australia by 3 wickets at the Junction Oval. The Redbacks stumbled to 7 for 132 before finishing with 227. Victoria reached the target with almost 5 overs to spare. The Victorian openers shared a century partnership at better than 5 and over. That set up a chase for a bonus point for getting the runs within 40 overs, but after losing 4 for 23, the Vics decided to be satisfied with just a win. The loss ensures the Redbacks will finish last, even if they win their final round match. Identical twins on the Sunshine Coast have amazed medical staff after giving birth 22 minutes apart and within metres of each other. Nicole and Renee Bailey hadn't even planned to conceive at the same time, but ended up being due 2 weeks apart. Nicole had been in labour for 2 days when her sister's waters broke early this morning. Renee didn't even make it to the ward, with baby Ruby arriving in the foyer at the Sunshine Coast University Hospital. Ruby's very close cousin Xavier was born soon after, just down the hall.
I was just about to get in the bath and I heard that someone had had a baby in the corridor, and I knew that Renee was coming, so I was like, what? Yeah, and you had your baby, then I had my baby 22 minutes later.
To the weather now, and last night minimum temperatures were generally 1 to 5 degrees below the February average, mostly ranging between 9 and 13. It was coldest at Falls Creek, where it got down to 1. Today, early morning fog patches in the south cleared mid-morning. Cloud formed across the eastern half of the state this afternoon, while the western half remained sunny throughout the day. It was hottest at Mildura and Walpurgis with a top of 33. In Melbourne, we reached our high of 22.4 degrees at 3:44 this afternoon. It's outside now, it's 20. Interstate today, it was sunny in Sydney, Perth, Adelaide and Hobart. Brisbane and Darwin had showers. The satellite image is showing mid to high level cloud over the Kimberley, through the top end of the Northern Territory and down through inland eastern Australia. A broad area of low level cloud is sitting over Queensland and northeast New South Wales. An onshore flow is producing low level cloud over the coastal regions of Victoria, Tasmania, New South Wales and southeastern Queensland. A high over the Bight is extending a ridge eastwards over our south. It'll move slowly south into the Tasman Sea by Sunday, when an inland trough will start to deepen and affect Victoria's west. There'll be showers and storms over the northern tropics tomorrow, with isolated storms in western Queensland. Expect some showers over parts of the Victorian, New South Wales and Queensland coasts, as well as in Tasmania. For the capital cities, it'll be sunny in Perth and Adelaide. Sydney and Hobart will be partly cloudy, and Brisbane and Darwin will have showers tomorrow. Back home, it'll be dry and sunny right across the north and dry and partly cloudy over the south, with possible morning fog over Gippsland. Expecting a top of 24 in Orbost and Bairnsdale. Temperatures would likely be below average right across the state. Winds light to moderate southerly, tending fresh at times over central elevated districts and the southeast coasts. On the bay, 10 to 15 knot southerlies will get up to 20 knots later in the day, waves to 1 metre. Friday in Melbourne will be overcast with a slight chance of a shower in the northwestern suburbs. We're heading for a top of 22 degrees tomorrow down to 16 tonight. For your weekend, partly cloudy on Saturday 27, a sunny 33 on Sunday, with the heat continuing into early next week. Monday fine and 35, Tuesday partly cloudy and 33, then a cooler day on Wednesday with a shower or two and a top of 20. And that's it for this evening's bulletin. Sarah Ferguson is up next with 7:30.